tell anyone and got caught, and it just had to spend $500,000 sending them back across the seas. And that has to do with something like myself. I'm not originally from Australia. I'm born in Israel, and when I came to, when I landed in Australia, one of these times, there was mayhem at the airport, and they couldn't actually process us quite in an organized way. And one of the people in charge there from biosecurity came up to me and said, "Are you bringing anything into Australia that you shouldn't? Any plant material or animal material?" And I said, "Oh yeah, well I have some cheese and some coffee, but I wasn't quite prepared." And he just looked at me, and he looked me in the eye, and he wanted to make sure that I was actually telling the truth. And it was this very strange situation to have someone staring me in the eye to see whether I was legitimately just proclaiming that I'm only coming into Australia with a piece of cheese. And it's these sorts of situations that are quite unique to Australia. I've been to other countries, and Australia is unusual in its biosecurity laws, and it has to do with the fact that Australia is either a large island or a rather small continent that has been for a very long time isolated from the rest of the world. But since white fellows came to this shore, it has become, for all intents and purposes, a part. A bridge has been formed with the rest of the world. Australia is no longer isolated as Johnny Depp's dogs demonstrated. We may have had an invasion of, what is it, Scottish Terriers? Yorkshire Terriers, yes, that would have gone running. So the reality, and I'm sorry that I'm going to have to be moving backwards and forwards a bit, we don't have a clicker. The reality is that Australia is in fact international. I'm not the only foreigner who lives here now permanently. So do the world's largest population of wild horses, so do donkeys, and you may not be aware, but the only place on earth where there are wild camels are not where I come from, not from Israel, but here in Australia. And so if you go out into the Australian bush, you are likely to meet creatures that have evolved here for millions of years, and those that we have actually brought here, and they have gone wild. Now, what is an animal to do when they are brought to new lands, but to make a life for themselves? And they have, and have done it quite successfully. And quite rapidly, we started to notice that species that were quite common, native species, marsupials that were common across Australia, were disappearing, and they were disappearing fast. And in some of these cases, the disappearance seemed very closely linked to the fact that there are these new introduced species that are spreading across the country and eating what is obviously available, which are the local, or what we call native species. And so Australian conservation, I'm a conservation biologist, and every country has a slightly different model of how they think about conservation, what conservation is all about. And very quickly, when I came here, I learned a particular Australian conservation model, and it goes briefly something like this. We have all these introduced animals that have proliferated across the country. They are using native resources, which entails killing native animals or killing native plants. So it is our duty to suppress their populations in whatever way we can. So we'll shoot them and blast them and poison them and do whatever we need to do. And then voila, we'll get our wildlife back. We'll get a proper Australian wilderness back the way it was. What seemed to have gotten lost in this model, and the vast majority of conservation efforts is devoted to to that end, to suppressing introduced species in order to help native species recover. But there are costs to this approach. I mean, they're financial. It's incredibly expensive. I mean, killing animals takes a lot of time, takes a lot of money. It has ethical costs that we often have not thought through thoroughly. There are social costs. Some of you may be familiar with toad busting campaigns where children may participate in killing animals for the good of nature. And there are issues that we are needing to grapple with, that this model has costs. And we need to be very clear about whether this cost makes sense considering the real conservation challenges that we're facing. And the one cost that I want to focus on is on the environmental cost, because really, well, for one, I'm an ecologist, but secondly, that's really the point of what we're doing. The point is to make the environment healthier, whatever healthy may mean. I'd like to bring you back to the camel for a moment, because if we're talking about the environment, we do also have to think globally. And globally, large herbivores, the largest of herbivores, like elephants, you may be aware of the absolute catastrophe in Africa with the poaching of rhinos and of elephants. Large herbivores are in trouble worldwide. And there are 8 species of large herbivores that are doing very well here, and some of them are either extinct in their native range or they are endangered. And the camel is a fantastic example. If we were to snap our fingers and make all Australian wild camels disappear, there would be no wild camels in the world. And the problem with this is that we can't actually say, well, all right, we'll get rid of the camels in Australia because they really don't belong here. We'll help them recover where they should be, in their native range. But if you try to find out where the native range of a camel is, it's not that simple. They actually have an evolution that has taken them across the entire world. They evolved in North America. They only went extinct in North America, the camelid family, about 8,000 years ago, probably because of humans. And so we could say, well, we'll just ship the camels off and send them to North America because that's where they belong. That's where they evolved. Or we could say, well, no, actually some of the camel family actually managed to find their way down to South America when a bridge was formed between South and North America. There are still members of the camelid family in South America. Can send them there. Or we could try sending them to Mongolia. That's the only place in the world where their closest neighbors, not the dromedary camel, the Bactrian camel, has been reintroduced. They're extremely endangered. The ones we send there are probably going to have the same sort of problems that the Bactrians are. Here they're doing well. Or we can send them to where I come from and essentially sell them into slavery. That's another option. Or we can start by just acknowledging that the one place in the world where they have found refuge, these creatures, is here. And if we decide that we want to eradicate them, at least to be aware of the fact that we're eradicating them globally. Another cost to bear in mind is that for the most part, and this is maybe one of the most obvious things, is that we constantly mess up. As an ecologist, I can promise you we do not understand ecosystems well at all. Ecosystems are complicated, complex, impossibly interconnected things. And when we try to fix problems, we often find that we create new problems. Macquarie Island is a very powerful case where a cat eradication program was conducted. It was the, I believe, second largest in terms of its area that was successful. They actually managed to wipe out cats, which for the most part is just not possible. And still today, that's considered one of the greatest success stories in the world. I've yet to be convinced why. Because what happened after when the cats were eradicated was that there was a rabbit plague and a mouse and a rat plague. Now, why did we want to get rid of those cats? think this is a World Heritage listed island. Cats are not native, rabbits aren't native, mice and rats are not native either, and there are native birds. And the cats eat birds, so we figure, well, we'll get rid of the cats and that'll be good for the birds. But when there was a rabbit plague, it caused a major decline in plants, which caused landslips that was actually destroying bird nests. And so the government then had to dedicate millions of dollars to eradicate the rabbits and the rats and the mice, and they have now declared Quarry Island pest-free. But what have we actually gained from all of this? Are the birds doing better? Are the plants doing better? And if they are, to what extent to justify what was expended there is not as clear. We need, as a society, to think about this. We may think it's a wonderful idea, but we need to be able to be at least aware of what the costs are. For the most part, and this is really the point, when we go out to, we tend to keep forgetting this, but when we go out to eradicate something, the point is to actually help something else. When those cats were eradicated, the idea was to help native birds that were nesting on the island, for example. For the most part, we don't get those responses. So we'll kill a lot of animals, but we don't get much in return at all. Often the opposite happens. We go out there, guns blazing, to save some endangered species, and we lose them. And we lose them again, and we lose them again, and we lose them again. But sometimes, well, once, twice, we have a winner. And there is no example as powerful as the woylie from Western Australia, the most sweetest little creature I've ever seen. And they used to be very common across the mainland. They were driven virtually to extinction, and a massive poison baiting campaign targeted at killing foxes, which were major predators of woylies, was a tremendous success. If you have a look at the graph and have a look at the dates at the bottom, we're talking about a population recovery over more than 20 years. I mean, you don't normally get a science grant for more than 3 years. I mean, this is a success to an incredible level, internationally significant. These animals were delisted as endangered species. That doesn't happen. We're in an extinction crisis, and here we are delisting the woylie. Until this happened. And we've lost them. We don't know why. It's not clear, but one of the possibilities is that instead of the woylies now being predated on by foxes, they're being killed by cats instead. And so we've replaced essentially one problem with another. This sentence was said a long time ago by a very early American conservationist. When we try to pick out anything by itself, we find it hitched to everything else in the universe. Now, what these stories and many others have pressed upon me is the need to be very humble in what we know and what we don't know, and to assume that what we think we know, we may not know so well. And these ecosystems, with their incredible complexity, when we go out trying to fix problems and to provide solutions, we need to be very, very careful about what it is that we're doing. So, there are undoubtedly costs to the current status quo conservation model of Australia. That's not debatable. But whether this is the only option we have, I would like to present another possibility. And the dingo, I promise, is on their way. I'm still speaking about other species. And I would like to suggest a different model that talks about coexistence. Because the reality is that Australia is now home to cats and foxes and cane toads. And there is nothing besides some futuristic idea that may come to someone. There is nothing that is going to change that. So if our purpose here is to live in an environment in which bilbies are flourishing and black-flanked rock wallabies are flourishing, and the native species that do exist now are doing well, then maybe we can envisage an ecosystem that has all of them, in it? Let's just put it out there as a question. And I promise the dingo is coming. This is a picture of a cane toad, a beautiful one. If we go back to this model again, coexistence is not possible if you agree that, or if we assume that the only way for species to coexist well is if they've evolved together. And the cane toad is a wonderful example because the cane toad, the problems with the cane toad is that they have poisonous glands on their backs. And where they came from, the predators, the amphibian predators all know that, and they know how to handle them. When they were brought to Australia, never mind why and the reasons, but they were brought, and here they are, and they start spreading, and suddenly predators are encountering a prey that has these poison sacs on their backs that they had never encountered before, and so they just eat them the way they would eat any other frog. And they die. And that's a perfect example of where coexistence is dependent on coevolution, that is, when species have evolved together. But what has been incredible to discover by a team, particularly from the University of Sydney, is that these toads have become an engine of evolution in Australia. There are now snakes that used to be susceptible, highly susceptible to cane toads that are now able to consume them. And the reason why is that their bodies are changing from generation to generation. They have bigger bodies relative to the size of their mouths. And the size of their mouths is what's going to determine the size of the food that they can put in their mouths. And that's going to determine the amount of poison that they ingest. And if the poison is in small enough doses, they can survive. And so they are evolving. And some are just figuring stuff out. Birds are flipping them over and eating them from the belly up. Some of you may have noticed dead toads flipped over. Initially, when the toads move into a new area, people often talk about it as an invasion front, but I have some problems with these linguistics of an army. But as they move into an area, some predator populations do crash, but they do also recover. So let's put aside for a moment the notion that coevolution is necessary. And even if it is necessary in some cases, it is definitely not necessary in all cases. Which brings another option. And the option is what are the forces that are structuring our ecosystems? How are the ecosystems even functioning? And what we have been discovering worldwide is that one of the biggest effects on how ecosystems function is whether or not they have big predators in them. Whether the oceans have sharks, whether Australia has dingoes, whether the north has wolves. The difference in how ecosystems actually operate, the very forces that structure them, are determined by whether or not there are big predators. I would like to take a slight break now and show you a movie. I had a bit of a technical issue, so I'm going to have to shut this down. I'm going to show you a 4-minute clip that explains what big predators actually do in ecosystems. And some of you may have seen it. I think more than 1 million already have. It's freely available on YouTube, and it was done by one of my favorite journalists and about research conducted by some of my favorite collaborators from the US. And even if you have seen it, it's one of those things very enjoyable.
Exciting scientific findings of the past half-century has been the discovery of widespread trophic cascades. A trophic cascade is an ecological process which starts at the top of the food chain and tumbles all the way down to the bottom. And the classic example is what happened in the Yellowstone National Park in the United States when wolves were reintroduced in 1995. Now, we all know that wolves kill various species of animals, but perhaps we're slightly less aware that they give life to many others. Before the wolves turned up, they'd been absent for 70 years. The numbers of deer, because there was nothing to hunt them, had built up and built up in the Yellowstone Park, and despite efforts by humans to control them, they managed to reduce much of the vegetation there to almost nothing. They just grazed it away. But as soon as the wolves arrived, even though they were few in number, they started to have the most remarkable effects. First, of course, they killed some of the deer, but that wasn't the major thing. Much more significantly, they radically changed the behavior of the deer. The deer started avoiding certain parts of the park, the places where they could be trapped most easily, particularly the valleys and the gorges. And immediately those places started to regenerate. In some areas, the height of the trees quintupled in just 6 years. Bare valley sides quickly became forests of aspen and willow and cottonwood. And as soon as that happened, the birds started moving in. The number of songbirds and migratory birds started to increase greatly. The number of beavers started to increase because beavers like to eat the trees. And beavers, like wolves, are ecosystem engineers. They create niches for other species. And the dams they built in the rivers provided habitats for otters and muskrats and ducks and fish and reptiles and amphibians. The wolves killed coyotes, and as a result of that, the number of rabbits and mice began to rise, which meant more hawks, more weasels, more foxes, more badgers. Ravens and bald eagles came down to feed on the carrion that the wolves had left. Bears fed on it too, and their population began to rise as well, partly also because there were more berries growing on the regenerating shrubs. And the bears reinforced the impact of the wolves by killing some of the calves of the deer. But here's where it gets really interesting. The wolves changed the behaviour of the rivers. They began to meander less. There was less erosion. The channels narrowed. More pools formed. More riffle sections, all of which were great for wildlife habitats. The rivers changed in response to the wolves. And the reason was that the regenerating forests stabilised the banks so that they collapsed less often, so that the rivers became more fixed in their course. Similarly, by driving the deer out of some places and the vegetation recovering on the valley sides, there was a soil erosion because the vegetation stabilised that as well. So the wolves, small in number, transformed not just the ecosystem of the Yellowstone National Park, this huge area of land, but also its physical geography.
What the team from the US have been finding about wolves, we're finding all over the world, but the tragedy is that there are very few places where we can even study these powerful processes, and that is because big predators are persecuted and hunted globally. 94% of large carnivore species, one of their main threats are humans, direct human persecution. And this is true all over the world, and it is certainly true here. Australia has one top order predator. They come in different colors. I thought I would put in a few pictures just so you could see that, that dingoes can have a variety of colors. But Australia just has one. In the US, for example, or in Africa, they have an entire guild of large predators. So there might be wolves living with grizzlies, living with black bears, living with cougars. Australia has got the dingo. And as a biologist, that makes life quite easy. It also has ecological consequences, because when we mess with dingoes, the effects that we're having on the ecosystems are massive. And so it is, so the strength of the evidence that we have now for the ecological role of the dingo as a top predator is actually one of the strongest in the world. Some would argue the strongest. The difficulty is that, unlike other places in the world where national parks protect their top predators, perhaps, I mean, they may have poaching problems. In India, for example, they have problems with poaching of tigers. But here in Australia, dingoes have no actual enforced legal protection anywhere, even on World Heritage listed sites. It is actually incredible that it is okay to kill dingoes on places like Fraser Island. It is okay to poison bait national parks. The fact that we're killing dingoes on pastoral lands is obvious. We're going to get to that for a moment. But people who raise livestock kill predators. They do that all over the world. But we're talking about national parks. So as ecologists, I'm actually not able to do research on dingoes in national parks, because it's one of the most dangerous places for dingoes. It's not on farmland, it's in national parks. And what I would like to show you is a quick run through a few examples that suggest, at least to me very strongly, that we can't imagine an Australia that, yes, has Australian foxes. And maybe we can even start thinking about granting them citizenship. But of course, first, we have to grant citizenship and protection, at least in some places, at least in World Heritage listed places, protection for dingoes, and then see what happens. And this is what we can see. Big, big effects. This is obviously, these are a map of the state of Queensland from the 1950s. Each dot is a scalp. We actually still do that today, which is amazing. We actually give money for people to scalp predators in Australia. Isn't that amazing? This is from the 50s, and the map on your left are each dot is 5 dead foxes, and the map on the right, in the same time period, are dingoes. If you take those two maps and put them one on top of the other, as Dr. Letnick has done and his team, what you find is that where there are many dingoes, there are fewer foxes, and this is at the level of an entire state. But again, the point here is not to get rid of foxes. It's okay to love foxes. What we're talking about here is an extinction crisis that foxes are strongly associated with. This is a map of tragedies. The pinker it is, the worse it gets. The dark pink shows the number relative to that area of marsupials that have gone extinct. The light green are places that have retained most of their biodiversity. That is our condition, and it is grim. The dark pink, if you can see in the small letters, is 60% of marsupial species that have vanished. This is a map of dingo abundance, high abundance, low abundance. The gray are high abundance of dingoes, and the white are in low. And Professor Chris Johnson and his team took the two maps, put them one on top of the other, and voila. Where dingoes are doing well, marsupial extinction has been less severe. That is, where dingoes do well, marsupials do well. And that is the point. I mean, that is an incredible evidence, considering the fact that we are talking across the scale of an entire continent, essentially. Australia also has this this interesting thing called the dingo barrier fence, which is one of the longest structures in the world. It's well over 5,000 kilometers, and we're maintaining it. And the brilliant idea of this fence, I'm saying facetiously, is to keep the dingoes on the northern side of the fence and keep them out of the southern side of the fence in order to help sheep production inside the dog fence. The effect of this is what has been described as two ecological universes on either side of the fence. Inside the fence, where the dingoes are persecuted severely, they are actually still in there, but they are persecuted with limitless funds, essentially. That is where the population of foxes are highest. That's where species of small mammals are less likely to occur. That's where the vegetation is in poorer condition. And you just go to the other side of the fence, and instead of finding foxes, higher densities of herbivores, you find dingoes, you find smaller native prey species, some of which are endangered, and you find more vegetation. Similarly, if you manage, and we've had all sorts of problems doing this, but if you can, for a moment, get a place to leave dingoes alone, just for a little while, the effects that they have are almost immediate and powerful. When dingoes recover, cats and foxes decline, small native mammals increase, and herbivores as well, whether it's kangaroos or rabbits or goats or whatever, decline as well. And you get the opposite when you do the opposite. So when you go into a place that's been left for a while and then you poison bait it with the purpose of getting rid of foxes, you actually get more foxes, time and time again. Whether it's in the desert where we do our research or whether it's on the East Coast. And so coming back to co-evolution, this is a picture recently taken from Israel of native wolves hunting a native wild boar. Well, actually that's a little bit of a fib. That boar was actually chasing the wolves. But just for the context, they do hunt wild boar. And because they're in areas of Israel, just like here, wolves are persecuted, although they are protected in national parks, but they are persecuted in ranching areas. There is a population explosion of wild boar, native wild boar. If you go to the city in the north called Haifa, where I come from, they're practically moving into the cities now. They are everywhere. Spot the difference. Here's a dingo hunting, and this time really is hunting, a wild boar, and this wild boar is not native. I failed to find, as an ecologist, the difference between what a dingo is doing to a non-native boar and what the native wolves in Israel are doing to the native wild boar there. And what happens in both places when the predators are persecuted. In both conditions, you get the same response. And so we have an ability to, at least we have enough evidence now that we can start thinking about changing the way we think about conservation. Moving from this model that I introduced to you before to this model, where we allow dingoes to recover, allow dingoes to naturally, as predators, suppress their prey, suppress smaller predators, which is what predators do, and allow native species to recover. There's no theoretical reason that I am aware of that a bilby and a fox are incapable of living in the same ecosystem. If that is true, the bilby is doomed, because we are not helping. Okay, so that is my proposition, but I would like to end this talk with how are we going to actually do it? Let's say, for those of us who would like to see this happen, how would we actually transition to this different model? Because if we think back in time, and if we follow the arguments that dingoes are so vitally important, this whole story actually starts with persecution of dingoes. We don't know what Australia would have been like if white people had arrived on its shores, seen the dingoes, and been very friendly to them. Would there be bilbies everywhere? Would the foxes have taken a foothold? And if they had, how would they? What would Australia look like today if for the past 200 years we were not waging a war on dingoes? That's an open question. But since that is not reality, how do we actually transition from a situation where the picture in the left depicts an actual ranger inside of a national park taking a photo of himself bragging that he has killed a dingo inside a national park, to one where even on farmlands, and I will argue that dingoes are a benefit not just to bilbies, but they are a benefit to sheep, not just cattle, to sheep. Give me a chance. And in order to present this idea, I have to is that we have to first understand what a dingo actually is. And in order to understand what a dingo is, we just have to understand a little bit about ourselves. There's a lot in common between what we are and what dingoes are. We are social creatures. We are highly social creatures. And if you think for a moment about the difference for a human being between living in a war-torn area, in a poverty-stricken area, in a place where you don't really know where your home is and whether your home is going to be where it was, versus a place like Australia. I can tell you it's very different. It's very different living in a place in peace and a place in war. Humans behave differently. Our ecological effects are different. We even breathe differently. And dingoes, actually, just like we do, they perform family planning. They don't all breed. If we leave them alone, they form complex social structures. That's true for most of the large canid species, where you have one pair that reproduces, that means one mother, and the other females do not reproduce. And if they do, accidentally, if they have a fling, their children are killed, mostly. The alpha female will kill the pups of the subordinate family members. Everything about dingoes is social. When dingoes are killed, every single female can reproduce. None of them hold territories. They can essentially go wherever they want. There's no laws. It's just what we experience when we live in unstable social structures. Their ecology, their behavior, their psychology, everything about them, just like us, is a social affair. So when we make decisions, regardless of whether we're from national parks or whether we're farmers or whatever it is we're thinking about, we have to understand that these are social predators. And interestingly, I would like just for a moment just to say that something that they all share in common, that there's evidence for this for large carnivores all over the world, whether it's brown bears, whether it's cougars, whether it's wolves, coyotes. The war on coyotes, by the way, I mean, it is incredible. It's actually nearly as bad as here. There are killing competitions for coyotes, where the more coyotes you kill, the prize for the biggest killer. And ethically, I would have a thing or two to say about that, but practically, they can still continue to have these competitions, and they're not running out of coyotes. And they're not running out of coyotes because when you kill coyotes or kill wolves or kill dingoes, you break their social structures and they breed faster. The highest population density of dingoes that we have found anywhere in Australia was inside the dog fence. Isn't that quaint? This is just one example that I'd like to share. This is a cattle station that Adam O'Neill, my partner, and I were managing for 2 years. We started visiting this cattle station in 2011, just for research purposes, and then ended up taking over management for 2 years. We had poaching problems to begin with, that is before we actually took on the management, because protecting dingoes currently is not easy, even when the landowners wanted so. But when we did manage, we got a practically flat line of the population. I mean, we had a drought. Oh gosh, did we have a drought through that time? And then the rains came, and things changed. And yet the dingo population was stable. is the right thing to do on farmlands. And there's evidence of this from all over the world. There was recently, or actually a few years ago, a wonderful study conducted in South Africa. I just met with them, where just like farmers here kill predators to protect their livestock, over there they were killing leopards, jackals, and caracals to protect their sheep. They got 11 farms to stop killing all predators. Each one found whatever way to deal with it. Some used guardian dogs, some put these collars around the neck of the sheep. It didn't seem to matter. But what was amazing is that within 2 years, the losses that they had to predators went down by 70%, and their costs went down by 70%. That there's that cost per sheep, because going around killing dingoes or killing leopards costs money. I have also recently just visited a ranch in Zimbabwe, where they use herders and the tiniest little dogs to protect their cattle from lions. Now, I understand that it can be hard to live as a farmer with dingoes, but these guys are handling lions, and they're handling leopards, and they're handling African wild dogs. And these dingoes are not the biggest predator in the world. We should be able to handle them too. These guys, without anything more than their rudimentary but fantastically complex husbandry skills, the way they move with their cattle, the way they take them out through the day. The only time they actually, just recently, they did lose one cow that escaped from, they have this sort of compound where they keep the cows locked up at night. One got out, the dogs were sleeping, and a lion got one of the cows. Their mistake. Another study in the US showing that every time they went out in a big campaign to wipe out wolves, to kill wolves, they had an increase in stock losses. Time and time again. And we got the same results here by a study in Queensland, showing that where dingoes are persecuted, you get more stock losses, not less. And again, that ties in with their social structure. When you have a stable pack of dingoes living on your station, those are the dingoes you're living with. When you kill them, any dingo is coming through. They can't hold territories. They'll kill. They can't even finish the kills that they're eating. They don't even have a family to hold this carcass. They have to keep moving on. Another thing to bear in mind is that dingoes are not the major killer for livestock overall. This is not the strongest evidence I could show you, but it just happens to be our data. We haven't published it yet. But I can tell you personally, each one of these dead cows we saw and we recorded. During the 2 years when we were managing this station, Evelyn Downs station, we had 8 calves that we recorded as definitely killed by dingoes. 6 of them happened at the beginning, when the dingoes were still unstable. The vast majority, regardless. The thing that was really killing cows was, or cows overall, was the dry season, when it was drought. When we had no rain, cows died. And the biggest killer for cows on the property that we run was, without a doubt, boggy dams. Boggy dams and incessant heat. And that is something we can handle, and we did. That's a husbandry issue. That means that when the dams do dry up, you desilt them. You make decisions about where you put cattle, how many cattle you have, how you move them. This is an animal husbandry decision, and 80% at least of the cattle that died on our property died from either husbandry or, as far as we knew, natural causes. Now, the bottom line is that I know it can be hard to be a farmer. And I was not personally in charge of that manager. You can speak with Adam, my partner, or Neil, who was not sleeping at night through some droughts. It is not easy, but it's important to remember that we are growing these animals because there are consumers. Because there are consumers out here that want to buy these products. And now we have to look at this from a consumer point of view. When you go to the supermarket, Do you want to put your money for a product that contributes to persecuting big predators, whether it's here or elsewhere, or would you rather buy a product, whether it's wool, whether it's meat, that goes to a farmer that has figured out a way, through thick or thin, to coexist with big predators? And globally, there is now a certification in North America and South America, in many countries around the world that are predator-friendly certified. There are now big organizations, particularly in the clothing industry, that are becoming certified. So it's not just a matter of certifying a farmer, it's certifying Nike to say that within 3 years, the moment you get your certification, you are only allowed to source your products from predator-friendly farmers if you want to be predator-friendly or wildlife-friendly. So, as consumers, we are the ones, all of us, the entirety of society, are going to have to make a choice. Or we have an opportunity, that is, a growing opportunity to make a choice. And I would like to end with, to introduce you to a field called compassionate conservation. This is not just about money, this is not just about biodiversity, this is also about the kind of human beings we want to be, the kind of relationships we want to have with nature, whether we are rangers, farmers, economists, city dwellers, no matter what we are, the kind of relationships that we have change the way that we interact with nature. And what we're finding is that being compassionate and not being so quick to use the gun and use the poison as our first line of, in this toolkit that we have, as conservationists or as farmers, let's just put lethal control at the bottom and try other things first. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks very much for that, Arian. I'm sure there's a lot of food for thought in Arian's discussion today. We'd like to throw the last couple of minutes before afternoon tea open to some questions from the audience. If anyone's got any they'd like to ask, please do so now, and Arian will be able to answer for you.
On the last second pictures, you have a dog there. And Morama is the name of the dog that I believe is from South or from Italy, somewhere there that protect the.
I forgot to tell you about the marina.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you. There's a reason. There's a reason I showed you that awesome picture. Thank you very much. Wait. Now this is very cool. You will all agree. Okay. The story goes like this. There are some places that don't have big predators. That's just true. That's a fact. I mean, little islands or urban areas, not everywhere can have lions or dingoes. So what do you do about those places? Well, there is, off the coast of Victoria, a little island called Marima Island, and they have a colony of penguins, and they were losing the colony fast. They had 500 pairs, or 500 penguins breeding on this island, and foxes were killing the penguins. And no amount of poison baiting, poisoning their dens, shooting them, blasting them, nothing helped, because it's not really an island so much. When the tide is low, the foxes can move back onto the island, and they went from 500 to about 5. They essentially lost the penguins. And then one day, this chicken farmer, this free-range chicken farmer, went up and said, you know, I've got these Marima sheepdogs, and they protect my chickens, my free-range chickens, from foxes. And what is a penguin if not a chicken with a dinner suit? Train my dogs, train them to protect the penguins. And amazingly, they said, okay, let's give it a go. We've got nothing else to lose apart from the penguins. We've tried everything. And the darn thing worked. The Marima dogs started guarding the penguins. The penguin colony recovered. They had no more, today, this started in 2006. And it was such a success that they moved the project to protect another colony of, this time, gannets on the mainland, which are actually apparently not entirely sure that they're native to that area, but never mind. They are now protecting, in an urban area, and they're protecting these gannets. And this is going so well that next year, I think, Zoos Victoria is going to trial the very first ever reintroduction of, I remember it, a bandicoot. An eastern bar bandicoot with marimas. And I don't know if it's going to work. It's quite different because... But they have actually succeeded in protecting these colonies of birds without shooting anybody, without poisoning anyone, and they've got these amazing, magnificent dogs that are not only being used with incredible success to protect sheep. These dogs have also saved the businesses of several sheep farmers that were ready to just walk off because they could not stop predation by dingoes. And these guardian dogs, whether these are marimas or others, are doing incredible things. And at the end, I mean, we are all dog people. I mean, it's just a joy. It's the most uplifting conservation story I have ever come across in Australia. And thank you for reminding me to share it.
I've got a question. Could you please comment on the argument that the dingo is not native to Australia? This argument is being used for the basis for not protecting the dingo, or indeed for government-funded eradication or attempted eradication campaign. But that particular issue seems to go to the heart of a lot of these questions.
Yes, thank you. We actually don't know what a native species is. It depends how you define it. Legally, the dingo is native because they were here before 1788, and we had to sort of put a cutoff point, and that's what we did. But in reality, there are all sorts of species where either they don't have a native range, there have been cases of plants that have hybridized, that is, a native plant hybridizing with an introduced plant to create a new, essentially, species of plant that is native sort of nowhere. The dingo is perfect, and the reason why I am so passionate about this introduced native, not native divide is because it's the dingo that has brought me to the subject. I wasn't particularly interested in it before because the dingo falls exactly through the cracks. They're not really native. Depends how I mean, they're not native the way a kangaroo is native, if by native you mean how long they've been here. They have come here in some way, we don't know exactly how, several thousand years ago, and we might say that they've even been here for as much as 18,000 years. But that depends where you want to put the bar. If you want to put the bar at 1788, yep. If you want to put them at the bar at 1,000, at 1,000,000, at 2, it depends. Where do you cut off in your history?
So there is no definition?
There's a legal definition. There's a sort of consensus, sort of. But there's a lot of species that just don't quite make it. And in the case of the dingo, and this is the tragic thing, canids will always hybridize with other canids. Wolves, coyotes, red wolves, or there's red wolves, gray wolves, eastern wolves, even jackals, and dogs. They all hybridize. The dingoes are no different. So actually, many of the wolves in Yellowstone National Park are black. And the reason why they're black is because they have domestic dog ancestry, apparently. So they're not pureblood. And actually, they were reintroduced to Canada, so some are arguing they're not native to there either. They are just, several hundred kilometers north. It's been very easy to brush aside the dingo, especially by calling them wild dog. That has been brilliant. Because the moment you call them a wild dog, and it doesn't matter if their great aunt had a fling with a poodle, that's enough. The moment you call them a wild dog, another beautiful thing is that we can't even tell the difference. And we don't need to tell the difference. We just call them a wild dog. The moment we call them a wild dog, they are delegitimized from conservation concern, and that's the end of it. Although that still doesn't make sense to me, considering this is one of the countries that loves dogs more than any other. There's more dogs per human here anywhere, so even if these wild dogs were dogs, why is it that they elicit this hatred I can't understand from a nation that loves dogs? But these wild dogs are dingoes. Some of them may have some domestic dog ancestry. Some wolves will have a bit of coyote in them. Some call them coy wolves. They all hybridize. So is the dingo native? I think the word native is a problem.
Very important for us to remind that in the key to the research that the good doctors bringing to us, for every action there is an equal in size and opposite in direction reaction force. It's as simple as that. So in actual fact, Isaac Newton figured out one of those fundamentals of life back in 1687, and now we're actually observing those sorts of things in the natural environment. So I don't think it's rocket science, I just think it needs a shift in the paradigm in which we think. So thank you for that. So as a lead-in, I know that we're about to hear from primary producers now, and they have a very significant role in our community, and I know that some of the things they may say might upset some of you, might even irk you, might even make you feel the urge to throw cake at us. Please resist them.
Thank you for that introduction. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. First of all, I'll just give you a brief outline of my background so that you know where I'm speaking from and where my ideas might have came to me. What I'm about to say, I'm sure won't upset you at all. My parents operated dairy farms until old age got the better of them, and they passed on. My primary education was at Monte, Gundyre and Tyro State School. My secondary education was at the Queensland Agricultural College for 5 years. After that I worked for 3 years at the dairy factories at Mandubra and Gayndah, then joined the old Department of Agriculture and Stock, now Department of Primary Industry, and my wife and I were posted to various centres throughout the state, Gympie, Wallach, Malanda, yes, in the Brisbane Valley, and Southport on the Gold Coast. Southport those days was much different to what it is today. There was a lot of open land and some farms down there. After 20 years service, while we were in Southport, I resigned and we bought the family beef property at Rowena. We managed the beef property successfully for 35 years. Goes on a bit longer than that anyway. And until my wife's health necessitated a move to Tyro and a small 190 hectare farm on the river. Now about the dingoes. During our early years at Rowena, it was not uncommon to see dingoes singly or in packs of 4, 6, sometimes 8. Numerous occasions I had to rescue my faithful old cattle dog who was being mauled by 3 or 4 dingoes. He always thought he was a tough guy, and quite often when we were out mustering in the paddock, a pack of dingoes might run away. Old Bonza thought, nah, here's a go. He chased them. Needless to say, it wasn't very long before he came back like a rocket with 3 or 4 dingoes after him. Our property was situated at the foothills of Ura Mountain and bordered by Munna Creek. We rented from the Crown 1,200 hectares of land, and together with 800 hectares of our own, that was our big enterprise. Ura country, being likely to heavily timber country, was ideal breeding ground for dingoes. And often during the night, we'd hear them howling and howling away. It wasn't uncommon for 3 and 4, 5 nights during the week we hear them howling. Kangaroos and wallabies, while not in great proportions, were numerous. We see them on the flats in mobs of 20, 25. I never shot or allowed anyone to shoot a kangaroo or wallaby on that problem. They were there for the dingoes. I never baited or trapped a dingo. Never. During the majority of the years we were there, we ran a male steer to fattening operation. Sometime during that period, a neighbour used to rent us some paddocks, and we used to buy calfy cows, let them calve, grow the calves up to 4 to 6 months of age, sell the calves, and then fatten the cows. At no stage during that period of time did we ever lose a calf or an animal, young animal, from the effects of dingoes. Never. Our neighbour, he has 8,000 hectares of country, who runs a lot of breeders. Never once during all that time we were there did he ask us to join with him in a baiting program to reduce dingo numbers. And I think that speaks volumes that the dingoes, to him as well as to us, were not a problem. I don't really know whether they baited or trapped, but I'm pretty sure they did not, because they never, I used to speak to their stockmen, they never mentioned doing that practice. I'll just relate to you a story. Early one morning, when I was out feeding the dog, I heard this noise, like a succession of muted barks. And in investigation, I found, or saw, 2 dingoes chasing a big buck kangaroo. And they were about probably half a kilometre across the valley from me, and I could see them very plainly. They almost had him. He backed up against a big, dead silverleaf iron bark that had the top broken off. And he backed up against that, and then the contest got fairly even. They took it in turns to rush past him, and he used to try and grab him with his front paws. And in the end, they got sick of that, and I saw the bitch, I could tell it was a female. She went up the hill a bit, the dog, he went round the hill as if he disappeared. The old kangaroo thought, there we go. He hopped about 50 metres. Down she came, back he came, and back the kangaroo went to his tree. They then carried on for another 20 minutes or more, and in the end, those pair of dingoes, they gave it away. They went back up to the Ura Mountain. And in the end, the old kangaroo, he stayed there for half an hour, and I watched him all the time. In the end, he hopped away merrily. He was happy. He saved his life. The dingoes in my time, I don't know whether it was because I never baited them or shot them or chased them, but they were reasonably quiet. I had one female that my wife used to call my pet on the horse and on the four-wheel drive vehicle. I could get within 30 to 50 metres of that dog, but when I got off the horse or stopped the vehicle and thought I could get a bit closer, she moved that little bit further, and I never got within any closer to that distance. But she was that quiet. She never ran away, so I don't know why that was, whether she had prior contact with humans, I don't know. But that was my experience with that particular dingo. I don't know, you hear so much about the dingo causing a lot of loss of income in the West. And my sympathy goes out to those prime producers who are battling that problem. Over the years it's been baiting, trapping, shooting. It does not seem to have made a lot of difference. The problem that was there when I was a kid is still with us today. And that's a long time ago, believe you me. So, you know, we've got to take a different approach. And I'm not a scientist. Our learned friend in front here, with her other colleagues, eventually may come up with something that we can adopt to try and live with the dingoes. And that's what I think we've got to do, is live with them. Thank you, Lindsay.
It's a large property at the junction of the Mary and the Susan Rivers, so we have marine environments on 3 sides. So we've got no neighbours on 3 sides, which is pretty good. My grandfather would be 150 years old next year. His father and his grandfather were in Australia. They came in 1852, so we've been associated with the land since about 1852. So we've watched dingoes for a fair while. Some good stories and some not so good. Now, the old bushies, I'm going to go and contradict the young doctor here. The old bushies very seldom refer to dingoes as dingo. They just call them dogs. Now, we're not trying to say they're tame dogs or crossbred or anything, but the old blokes from the back country very seldom refer to them as dingoes. So if I don't call them dingo, don't think I'm trying to say they're tame dogs. We saw a sandy dingo, well, I'm going to have to say what I should say, a sandy dog yesterday, a bird watcher Bill over here and lovely Angela, animal care. We saw a beautiful red dog yesterday at Pandora. It was extremely healthy and so forth, so they're still around. Right, now I'm trying to not prove, but show how we have interacted with dogs for a long time. Now I'm going to try to suggest how many there originally were. Now the numbers we have today might be totally different to what they were originally. Now normally it's food, water and habitat that governs animal numbers. Now there's no doubt about it that the dingo's primary food around Pandora is the kangaroo. Now, so how many roos did we have originally? Well, who knows? Now, kangaroos can exist without water. We've proven that. They do not have to drink. We have 2 islands in the river, Bandicoot Island, about 400 acres, Kangaroo Island. Now it's named Kangaroo Island, so it must have had kangaroos on it from way back. Until the 1960s, both those islands had no permanent water. Petree swamps 1/2 metre deep, every dry spring they went dry, yet the roos stayed there. They do not have to have fresh water. Now I've often wondered whether they have a sip of the salt stuff and can handle that. But so if you're looking for old-time kangaroo numbers, water is not that important to them. Now Pandora was very poorly watered. On the bottom end, we had no water for about 6 miles from the homestead, from the bottom end of Pandora. So every drought, the last half of Pandora would have had no permanent water at all. So how many roos were there? Now, we have a few wallabies, not many. They don't venture out more than 200 metres from the bush. You never see a wallaby out in the middle of an open flat. Yet the roos, they just love the open flats. Now the roos, if they could give us a Christmas card every year, I'm sure they would, because we might have stuffed a lot of things by clearing, but the roos just love the open flats. Now I've often wondered, they've obviously evolved for millions of years in the bush. Now there would not have been 1 acre of open country on Tandora pre-white settlement. So the roos had to handle the bush. So if they lived for millions of years in the bush, you would think they would prefer the bush to the open, but they just love the open flats. So I'm suggesting that there's probably 2 or 3, maybe 4 times more kangaroos around now than there ever was, because they've got those big flats, they've got water everywhere, which they certainly drink if it's there. So maybe 2 or 3 or 4 times more than we have now. There's roos everywhere. Tandora's always been the home to kangaroos. The tourists come to look at them. My father protected the roos. He wouldn't let shooters in. But I've shot roos, heaps of them over the years. If it comes dry weather and you get a mob of roos, you knock a few over. Done that plenty of times. So that's about it. The roo population is certainly doing all right. There's no risk to the kangaroo population in the Marlborough district anyway. Right, so we get to the dog population. How many of those would have been 150 years ago? Now, no one can tell, but you can only go by family history and stuff from 150 years ago. My grandparents and father never ever left a story behind saying they saw 6 or 8 dogs in a pack. They just don't seem to like those numbers. You see 3 or 4, that's fair average. Normally 1 or 2. You see 6, it's very extraordinary. We had 6 there a few years ago, about 4 years ago, but you don't see it very often. Right, so normally it's food and habitat that governs the dingo numbers, but as I said, the roos are there by the hundreds, sometimes less than hundreds, but mostly in the hundreds. There's always plenty of food for dingoes, so you would think if there was plenty of food, they would breed up and breed up, but they don't seem to. You never see big mobs. So we must presume that there's never been big mobs. I don't think it's just how they work. They just work in 2 or 3, they can catch a roo pretty easy. I'll just go reiterate what Harry said here about the big roo up against a tree. The roos run into the dams. We've got 50-something dams at home. If the dogs chase the roo, he just runs in the dam, stands up in the water, and they can't get him. They'll, as Harry said, they will go away. They will go away and have a camp somewhere, but there's always one watching. And the old roo will come out. This doesn't go on for a couple of hours. This could go on for 2 days. It's not just a quick thing. They're not in a hurry. They used to be hungry. If they don't get in today, they know they're going to get it tomorrow. So that's how they work. The roos, we have seen numerous roos. I saw one just the other day, killed in the water. Now I don't think they're actually killed. They must drown because they are totally intact. You never see a roo that's dead in the dam, which we see quite often. They're never eaten. So they must actually drown, and they just float, and the dogs never swim in to get them. You'd think they'd swim in and pull them back. They just leave them there, which is actually a waste, but that's how it is. So they never ever go in and pull them out of the water. You see heaps of them in the water, so that's how it must be. So now, my father, he ran Tandora for a long time, his father before him. Now from 1915 to 1938, Tandora was unoccupied. They had another property in Antigua above Mungar. So the dingoes had a pretty free run there, yet they didn't breed up to dozens. So it's just a natural thing, obviously, that they keep their numbers pretty low. And we've shot them, poisoned them, trapped them for years, off and on. My father, as I said, didn't let roo shooters in. His theory was if you've got roos, the dogs are happy, and it usually works. Occasionally it doesn't. Now it's about I think it's 4 years ago. I had a little article in the paper, I got a few comments on it, I will admit. We had 6 dogs at home. I went out one morning and there were 6 dogs rounding up cattle. Just didn't want that, so I rang up Glenn, my son, he came out, we knocked 4 of them over. I had a picture of 4 of them in the ute dead, that was in the Chronicle, plus a little couple of pages of a story there that offended a few people, but anyway, that's how it was. So we try to regulate our, if the roos get a bit hot on the ground, we sort of don't worry about the dogs, and if the roos get thinned out, we clean a few dogs out. Now, if we shoot 2 or 3 dogs a year, if you see a dog every 2 months, you're doing well. You don't see them very often. So we might see 6 or 8 times a year, see 1 or 2 or 3, whatever it is. This year is unbelievable. Well, this year and the last half of last year. About the middle of last year, we saw 5 in a mob. Thought that's a few too many, so we go and sort them out. We have shot 16 dingoes in the last probably 9 months. Unheard of at Tandora. 1 or 2 a year maximum. This year 16 and there's still plenty there. Bill the bird watcher saw 4 in a mob a while back. We saw 1 yesterday. Darby O'Brien, the school teacher, come down chasing pigs. He saw 2, so at least 3 there we saw yesterday. So 16 in a year is, don't know what the story is, whether it's dogs coming in from the drought country. If they do come in from the drought country, now I'm trying to figure it out. Do they come to their neighbour's territory and the neighbour comes to his neighbours and they end up here? You would not think a dog would come from Charleville straight to Tandora. I couldn't imagine it. But we have shot 16 this year, which is unprecedented. Unbelievable. I just keep coming from everywhere. It's about 3 or 4 years ago we had lost probably 20 calves in 1 year. It took us a while to work out what was going on. They were dogs getting them, so we sorted those out, but we do not have much trouble. Now, I think it depends on I'm sure it depends on the feed available. If there's kangaroos and other stuff, the roos and the dogs prefer to go to all the work to catch a roo than to chase a calf. But if there's no roos there, they have got to eat something. And they'll eat calves, there's no doubt about that. Now, I can't talk all day, must be other time. We 1080 them occasionally. We hear about the foxes. You can't have dogs, and if you've got dogs, you've got no foxes. We've always had foxes, well, they're heaps at home. They live on crabs in the river, the little crabs. There is no doubt that 1080 will wipe the foxes out. Max Reese, Webber the crabber, can tell me when we do a 1080 run. I don't have to tell him, he tells me, because the crabs don't, the foxes do not walk out on the mud flats and chew his crab pots up to get out the bait. So he knows when we hit him with 1080 because the foxes are not there. That's about all I can say. Thanks for the time.
Well, that's pretty straight from the daily operations, and that's the sort of thing that we're here to accept and challenge at the same time. So moving on now to James. James is a fellow councillor and he has a dairy farm at Pumpa, one of 2 left on the Fraser coast. He advocates sustainable agricultural methods which he and his family put in practice on his farm and have for many years, and he's also on the Koala Consultative Committee. So without further ado, Councillor James Hansen. Thank you, James.
Thanks, Robert. First of all, I just need to look where the escape doors are and make sure that they are unlocked in case I have to make a hasty retreat. But I'm sure that they will unlock. They're all good if you tested them. So I'm taking your word for that. I'm actually wearing 2 hats today. One is, like Robert said, a councillor for Fraser Coast Regional Council, and I do hold a portfolio for primary production and rural infrastructure. Primary production is one of the most important things, not only in this region, but all regions of the state, and indeed the world. We all like to eat, and I challenge anyone here who doesn't like to have a good feed. So primary production is important. It contributes $65 million per year to the Fraser Coast economy. So we need to look after our farmers. We need to make sure that they have the tools and to be successful. Yeah, here, absolutely, absolutely. I don't get too many here's about farming, but it is important, and it is often overlooked by all levels of government, unfortunately. My other hat is I'm a dairy farmer, like Robert said, out in the Boomba area, and I guess there's not too many people here who know where that is. I know some have been to my farm, but a lot probably haven't. It's in the western parts of the Fraser Coast. It's about as far west as you can go and still be in the Fraser Coast. I'm 10 kilometres from the North Burnett regional boundary. It is one of the best areas, if not the best area of the Fraser Coast. I'm pretty... Someone's mumbling something under their breath, but I jump in. No, it's definitely one of the better areas of the Fraser Coast. It's got natural scenery, really decent people as well, which is good to see. My family and I, we do practice sustainable agriculture. I am very aware of the importance of diversity on farm. I have done a lot of land care work on the place. I don't go out there and advocate open slather for anything to be destroyed. But I am going to open up my heart here today and speak facts that how dingoes and dogs have affected me on my farm. And I'm a little bit younger than Harry, just by a couple of years, and a little bit younger than Butch. So I can't talk about the old days, but I can talk about what happened in the last 20 years or so. When I was young, it was very rare to actually see a dingo on our part of the world. Our country's fairly open, and it was somewhat of a novelty to see one walking through the paddocks, and I used to get kind of excited when I was a little kid. And I remember the first time I saw one, my father bowled it over. But yeah, that's not real good for a 9-year-old to see, I suppose, but that's life in the bush. And we never really had any attacks on our cattle when I was young. I can only recall one cow that was mauled, and she got over it. And then about 10 years ago, something strange really happened in our part of the world. All of a sudden, a lot more dogs started turning up. They were much more pure than I've ever seen before. These dogs were very brazen. You could get almost up close to them. And they didn't do a lot of harm for a while. We used to get the odd calf nibbled on, and then a few started coming home minus ears, minus a tail. And then they really started to hoe into our wiener heifers. And the worst year we had, we lost 30 wiener heifers in one summer. And a wiener heifer for a dairy farm is almost irreplaceable. They're about $1,000 to replace per unit, and over the life of that cow, she will earn you around $10,000. So if you work out the cost, that's a significant loss. And it got to the stage where I really couldn't sleep at night. You know, I'd wake up at 1 o'clock in the morning and I'd hear cattle and calves carrying on, and I knew that they were getting pulled down by packs of dogs. And they were packs of about 5, which is a little bit different than what Butch says, but they were packs of about 5. And I'd go out there, and it was always too late, because in the middle of the night it's very hard to line something up to shoot. Then they started becoming more brave, and they started putting them down during the daytime, and then they started taking to actually eating calves as they were born. Now that's a pretty bloody horrible thing to see, I can tell you. You go out there and you see a cow laying down and the calf laying on the ground there, and the calf is still alive with a hole in its gut, and there's 2 or 3 dogs there having to feed them liver. That's what they were doing. And you can get 20 feet from them, and they didn't run away. So I used to go home, grab the 223, go back and bowl the dogs, and then shoot the poor bloody calf. And this went on for a long time, and I don't know where these dogs came from. It was a different occurrence. They were never like that once. And there were rumours going around that they were releasing them from Fraser Island, but I always found that hard to believe. And there was neighbours of mine who actually said that they saw tracking collars on dogs, and I thought that was a bit of bullshit. Until one day when I was ploughing, and 2 dogs came out of the creek, both were wearing tracking collars, and they just played around the tractor, and then they ran back into the creek again. I don't think they lasted long, because I think one of the neighbours got them. But yeah, look, I don't know where they come from. They were definitely wearing collars, and they certainly were purebred dogs. We just started shooting. So I should have started by saying I had a bit of a love-hate relationship with dingoes. I always loved them when I was young, and then I began to absolutely hate them. And it's come full circle now. I don't mind them anymore. I'm not going to roll over and say that they're absolutely gorgeous things, but they're part of the Australian environment. They're always going to be there. We're never going to get rid of them. We just need to live with them. It's all about balance, in my point of view. We need to make sure that we have the best outcome for the environment and primary production. But after I shot most of these rogue dogs, there really hasn't been much of an occurrence. We had the odd one come through. Now, I shot one earlier this year. He was a bit of a bugger. He used to turn up and he just started coming around the house and checking out the place and started hanging around our cattle and our dogs. And you get within 20, 30 feet of him. And I gave him a lot of chances. He wasn't really bothering me until one day I saw him kill a chook, and that still didn't bother me. But then one day I saw him chasing after cows, and that did bother me, so he didn't last long after that. And I've got the photo on my phone if anyone wants to see it. But yeah, look, I certainly don't advocate going out there and wiping them out. I've never baited on my place. I don't believe in baiting. I think that not only is it a nasty way of dying, I think it has flow-on effects for other animals as well. But you know, I think it's a primary producer's prerogative. If they want to bait and they need to bait, well, then they probably have to bait, you know. But I choose not to. I choose not to. I also choose not to trap. I think that's a little bit nasty as well. I guess I can talk a little bit about the council. It was touched on before about the council giving penalties out, that sort of thing. We certainly do as a council. We certainly do. We certainly do, and we probably will continue to do that. We have roughly about 100 scalps per year come in to collect the bounty. The bounty's $40. Back in my Wuku Shire days, used to be a council in the Wuku Shire before amalgamation. I would have collected roughly about 500 scalps in 4 years. So, yeah, I think there is a push on the community to get rid of the bounty, but I don't think that's going to happen just in this point in time. There was also talked about before about alternative methods of controlling dogs, maremmas and that sort of thing. I think that's probably a pretty good idea. However, it's probably somewhat impractical in some cases with the really big spreads out our way. And in my case, I have country 50 k's from my home, and that's really hard to. And I only go out there maybe once a week or maybe once every 10 days. It's really hard to lock cattle up in that country. And to have a flock of maremmas there, I don't know how that would work today. It's also kind of rough country as well, tilly, scrubby country. But yeah, look, I think there's certainly an avenue to do that, and I think if you can do that, then it should be encouraged, absolutely. But to me, it's all about balance. It's all about balance. And I did hold back some of the gory details about dog attacks and that sort of thing. I didn't want to upset people too much, but it is really hard. And I mean, I'm not a person that likes to go out and kill. I'm not. But it is really hard on your soul when you hear calves and weaners carrying on in the middle of the night, day after day, night after night after night, and you go out there and you see calves with holes eaten in their rear ends, and that's what the dogs do. They go in from the rear end. And a lot of these calves were attacked and they hadn't even been born. They're only halfway up, you know. And it's also hard to see. In some occasions, I saw that the dogs started attacking cows as they were giving birth, and they used to eat their tongues out. You know, that's a pretty hard thing to see. You go out there and there's a cow and she's bled to death because she's got no tongue, and there's this bloody dog wandering around it, and but yeah, it's an interesting, I think, interesting episode that why it happened around 10 years ago, how they got really bad. Prior to that, we never really had a problem at all, and that episode only lasted for around 5 years, and now it's pretty much gone. But so I don't know how to explain that, eh? Yeah, I'll take some questions. That's pretty much it for me.
Thank you, Jane. Yeah, very confronting hearing those sorts of stories at the sharp end. So now, without further ado, we've got two extra panellists. Adam O'Neill, former pest control contractor. Is Adam here? Yes, Adam, if you could join us. And he's observed the relationship between dingoes and other animals and realised the necessity of the dingo in saving Australian native animals. He's also the author of Living with the Dingo. Adam, if you could join us. Thank you. And also Ray Revel, he's the operator. Ray, are you coming up? With your guide dog?
I'll leave with the orange.
Oh, thank you. And I think we all know Ray, and now also Malcom. Yes. Yeah, then okay. Well, I'm going to. Sorry, Malcom. I'm just following the sheeting. I've just been advised that we're now going to hear a few minutes of thoughts from Malcom.
When they're socially, unstable.
Thank you. Next question, please.
Just a question for James in relation to the dingoes which were attacking his livestock in comparison to Tendora property, is it? Where they had a large number of kangaroos. Could it have been the shortage of kangaroos or food for the dingo that caused that?
No, I don't think so. We have large numbers of kangaroos as well. It's just that they changed their, and our country's fairly open country as well. And we never, like I said before, we never really saw a lot of dingoes there when I was young or younger. But they just turned up around 10 years ago in packs and started behaving differently. We have a lot of kangaroos on the place, and the neighbours do as well. All that country out there in my part of the world, there's a lot of kangaroos.
Okay, thanks for that.
Carol?
You often hear in areas of the country that sheep farming was given up and cattle taken up because of the dingo problem. Can dingoes and sheep coexist?
Well, I was just recently in Zimbabwe, where they have, apart from cattle, they have sheep and goats, and they have lions. So yes, but the husbandry required is different. The reality is that there are dingoes where there are sheep. Sheep farmers are coexisting with dingoes anyway. But when problems occur, and again, this has to do, sheep farms tend to be smaller. These aren't, we tend to talk about them in hectares rather than in square kilometers. And the home range of a dingo will often be larger than the property size of a given farmer. And so if a farmer decides, okay, I want to become predator friendly or even want to be certified predator friendly, they're not going to have a stable dingo population on their land necessarily, because they don't control a large enough area. But in those circumstances, they can still make changes to the way they manage the sheep so that they're protected. So instead of focusing on killing dingoes, it focuses on protecting the livestock, and that's a husbandry decision. The example I gave from South Africa, that they had problems with, and still do, with leopards, jackals, and caracal. These are sheep farms. And so if sheep farmers in South Africa can handle leopards, sheep farmers in Australia can handle dingoes, probably.
George.
Yeah, I hear about the 1880, the poison they used.
1080. Question two.
The board, because
Okay.
I like someone to answer that who controls the feral cat? I believe the dingo is doing a good job to control not only the feral cat, but also
I think there should be a bounty on feral cats, but that's a different story.
I mean, everything we are here is the negativity on the dingo and the mainland. But is any positive side on the dingo and the mainland?
Yeah, look, I had no doubt that dingoes eat some cats. It's, and I mean, on my farm, I had an absolute plague of feral cats many years ago, and I got a few dogs that like cats, and together with dogs and shotguns, they didn't last long. But we cleaned up the feral cats on the property because they do a lot of damage, you know. And the dogs used to climb up the tree, and then I used to knock them out of the tree. But yeah, look, 1080. I mean, I'm not a fan of 1080 bait. I personally don't use it. I think it's tough on the environment. I think it certainly has a blow-on effect to other animals. I worry about the residual nature of it. They say it doesn't have it, but you know, it's sometimes not a coincidence that neighbours might bait and all of a sudden there's dead birds, you know, like scavenger birds, like crows, that sort of thing. I think it does stay active for a lot longer than people say. But having said that, 1080 is going to stay around. It's not, if we tried to remove 1080 today or tomorrow, we would have an absolute revolution on our hands from our primary producers.
So Ray, would you like to add to that? Have you ever had the exposure to that?
Well, can you hear me? Yeah. 1080, as James was saying, it does have a severe effect right across the native species in this country. James was saying how it affects our meat-eating birds. Well, it goes a lot further than that, and I, on hand, have seen it. Believe it or not, our possums and that also eat it. So do our bandicoots, and so does everything else that associates with meat. So it's a widespread thing. I'm pretty happy to hear that these guys are against it. And like James said, get rid of it and we're going to have a big revolution on our hands. So it's not something we're going to solve overnight, but we can work on it, and we need to make it an aware program that it does carry right across the board. It's just not going for one specific animal. If you think a feral cat's going to touch it, think again, because it won't. They're as smart as what a dingo is, and they will do exactly what dingoes can do. And the dingo will urinate on it, so that nothing else will go near it. It knows it's there, it knows it's poison, it will not touch it. They are smarter. They're working us out, and they're working above us. So you're going to have a problem with that. There was a story that somebody just told me recently today, that it is known that one dingo particularly went around picking up baits and dropping them in people's domestic dogs' yards. So it started a little bit of a revolution in the township, and people were blaming each other for knocking each other's dogs off. So it just goes to show you what sort of intelligence some dingoes may have. I mean, my guys, well, they're as dumb as they come. But they're lovable at the same time. These guys, for me, they're outspoken as well, not trained, or was that one of my staff? I'm really happy to hear that these guys talk about their dingo problems, and they spoke positively and not negative, and that's sort of given me a whole new outlook on their side of things as well. I come off the land also. I've been associated with dingoes for 50 years, and I'm not going to give away my age. A bit older than James. But I've learned a lot about them, and I'm still learning a lot about them, and I think we can all learn a lot from them. But we did lose the major apex predator of this country, and we all know that the thylacine was our number 1, and the dingo was number 2. Now we have dingo number 1. We've got to go with it. Without it, we're screwed. Our environment's gone, everything's gone. Their livelihoods are gone as farmers, our livelihoods and our lives are gone.
Can I just ask Juliet, do you want to talk about 1080 baiting and protocols and not really?
James, we just try to think about it.
Think about it.
This is totally 1080 discussion. It's insensitive. Anyway.
Right, we've used 1080 probably 3 times since it's been out. I don't know how long it's been out. It must be 20 years or more. The dogs get too hot, we hit them with 1080. Now, you don't just chuck the baits all over the place. You bury them at least 4 inches deep. 4 inches, at least. Don't think the old dogs can't smell them, they can smell them easy. You're right, you go along the track. Now dogs love to follow tracks. You don't just chuck it around in the bush because they don't go there. They follow the sandy tracks, the roads, fence lines and stuff. You dig the hole, you put it in, you mark the place. You come back, whatever time you choose later, whatever hasn't been taken, you dig them up and you take them home. There's nothing left there, the birds can't get them. Now this possums and stuff, I find that hard to believe. The foxes, there's no doubt about it, it'll wipe the foxes. As I said, the old crabber in the river, he can tell me when we hit him with 1080, because the foxes walk out on the mud banks and chew his crab pots up. And those foxes live on the little crabs in the river. Every fox scat you see on Tandora's got crab shells in it. They must eat millions, must have eaten millions over the years. We have a crab down there. When I got my new book out, I sent it to the expert and he couldn't tell me what it was. Possible new species, he said. And the foxes are eating them flat out. You can't tell me this 1080 is not this thing for the fox. It will just wipe like that. As I said, the old crabber can tell me when I do it. I don't tell him. So if it's done properly, it's the goods, and that's my opinion.
Okay, right, question?
I would just like to add from my own experience, kangaroos will drown dingoes in dams. They drown the dingoes.
Kangaroo will drown any dog.
Yeah, when the dogs go in, they hold them under the water. Also, in my experience, dingoes will hunt in packs, in the moor, in packs. And they will separate the cows, the young stock from the mothers, who will protect the calves until they get them on their own. Also, I would query how you're going to change your husbandry if you are a grazier with a huge big sheep station or a cattle station. You possibly can't lock your animals up every night like they have to in Africa. So when you said about changing husbandry practices,
yeah, so that's a question.
So that's, yeah. Also, I would like to add that in the dairy farming country in the foothills of the Toowoomba Range, it was only the cleared country where the farmers were losing their calves. We had virgin scrub on the property and we never had a calf attack because there were plenty of wallabies and things. But in the open country, just across the road, the farmer was losing calf after calf after calf to dingo.
So about that, would you like to stand for the challenge?
I think that was a fair comment. That's different depending on the livestock and depending on the environment. The husbandry style changes. Some stations use guardian dogs. When Adam and I were on station, our husbandry practice was not to kill dingoes. That was it. It's a personal. It can be a personal decision, what sort of method one is comfortable working with. It can depend on the animal, also even the breed of the animal, the kind of country. Are you in the desert? Are you on the coast? But I think it is time to put some demand on farmers to find ways to coexist better with the wildlife that they are, in many senses, a custodian of. And these demands on farmers is coming from all sorts of directions, whether it's the free-range chicken industry, whether it's organic. Society ultimately is going to determine what we consider to be an appropriate way to live in this world. And we're all in this together. So I think there's change in the air, globally, that we have to start looking after predators. And it's not just about farmers. I think it's important to remember that still in this country, the worst place for dingoes is not on a pastoral station, it's in a national park. So we can start in the national parks.
Very good.
I just have a couple of things with regards to Jane. He says there's property that he has that's really tough and almost unimaginable to have a dog there. Well, I think donkeys work really well at keeping, you screw your face up, but I think donkeys work fairly well at keeping dogs at bay. I think this is something that I've been reading about, and I don't think that it's unheard of that if one decided to try and eradicate some of the donkey problems that are out in the middle of the country, that they might not be utilized the same way as some of these brombies are dragged in to become the best of the riding horse.
Yeah, well, I think as landholders that you should investigate every avenue that you possibly can to have best practice on farm. You know, I think that's in everyone's best interest, including the farmers. And you're exactly right. People, it's community driven, it's consumer driven that people are going to demand that produce is sustainably produced, you know, and humanely produced. And we've embraced sustainable farming practices now for well over 10 years. And I don't know about the donkeys. I haven't looked into that. The country I'm talking about is not like hostile country, but it's hilly country. It's scrub country. It's bottle tree scrub country where like.
Well, if you're running cattle, you can run.
Yeah, I was flat feeding my cattle 6 months ago on there. I don't know how I'd feed some donkeys on there. It was that bloody dry, but yeah. Look, like I said, I think as landholders, it's beholden on us to investigate every opportunity or every avenue to implement best practice on farm. You know, I think most landholders are responsible that way. They want to do the right thing. They want to make sure that because we are only custodians of our land. You know, one day I'm going to be in a box somewhere. Hopefully it's a long way away, but one day I'll be in a box, and I want my country to be in a better state than what I got from my father in. I do not want to have a legacy of people looking back and saying, gee, he was a bloody arsehole of a bloke, wasn't he? You know, I don't want that. But yeah, look, yeah, all options should be on the table, absolutely.
Okay, we've got 5 minutes to go. I'm going to go 1, 2, and then we're going to have a raffle and a wrap up.
Firstly, I just want to raise thanks for the 3 members of the farming community that have invited me for me, and I'm very happy to see that they are trying to practice sustainable farming, and they are against a bit of 1080 grading. Lindsay, your comment is true, there's barrier for all that sort of thing. Problem is, as Adam and Arian both said, the highest risk area for dingoes is not on farming land, it is in national parks and state forests. They practice aerial baiting, aerial drops at 1080. They claim that in the aerial drops, they're marked, they're buried, but you can't mark and bury something that you're dropping out of randomly. 1080, as Ray said, very broad spectrum. It's not just animals, it's insects, it's soil, it's air, it affects everything. It might cause anarchy, it might cause a huge public outcry. But if we don't start instigating and call for change and to outlaw stuff, it's never going to happen. I really don't care about anarchy and public disruption. What I care about is having an environment. If we don't have an environment, we don't have us.
Just with 1080, it's also used very widely on feral pigs. We have a really big issue with feral pigs here on the Fraser Coast, and they cause untold damage. And that is probably our number one in the area in the battle against feral pigs is 1080 baiting. But yeah, look, personally, I don't use it. Personally, I won't use it.
How long have you had this feral pig problem?
Oh, it's been around here all my life.
Yeah, well, I've seen a lot of media about it recently, and from what I can tell, the problem seems to be increasing.
Yeah, it is.
There's no doubt about it. It's just increasing. So you're addressing this problem with 1080. You're baiting the pigs. You go back far enough, you find that the dingoes were stable. They were actually regulating the pig population. The pig population is becoming a problem because of the 1080. Being distributed by Parks and Wildlife and the government. So what you've got here is a cycle. You've got someone that started managing the forest, you've got problem dogs, you've got eruptions of pigs and other herbivorous species. So you address that with more 1080, which is further affecting the dingoes, which is exacerbating the problem you're trying to solve. So essentially what we need to do is stop baiting everywhere, let the dingoes be stabilised, then control and regulate all of these species that are erupting. You eliminate the problems with livestock production, and you're saving a shitload of money in the process.
It's certainly an argument that needs to be made.
I mean, you've got to inquire as to how these government agencies are managing our vast areas of wilderness and how that is impacting on all of the pastoralists. Like I said, you guys are only dealing with a problem that when it comes to these guys are baiting these wilderness areas for no apparent reason. They don't have livestock.
We'll just, sorry, but policy accepted. Everyone's quite passionate about their cause. I don't think it's about 1080 discussion today. I'll just take the gentleman and finish.
You've sort of taken some of my questions in the last statement, but I was involved in the cattle industry here, not far from Lindsay's place 25 years ago, and it was pretty rare to see a wild pig, but we occasionally saw a dingo. I'd like to ask anyone on the panel who'd like to comment, maybe Lindsay for a start, has it changed since then? I know there's a plague of wild pigs around here in a lot of places now. I don't know whether there's any change in the dingoes or not.
Right, wild pigs came to Tandoor in 1912. I know that for a fact, so I've been there over 100 years. Now, you hardly saw them for 40 or 50 years, an odd one here and there, and half a dozen somewhere else. Now, as I said before, we've got more wild dogs this year than I've ever seen in my life. The place is full of them. And the places, well, last year we had pigs by the bloody hundreds too, but not quite so many pigs this year. So there could be a correlation between pigs and dingoes, I'm sure there is. But I still can't understand why it took about 80 years for the pigs to get into plague precaution, because the dog numbers sort of were stable, I think, for all those years, so I can't answer your question, Ross. But
right, so one more comment, final comment from yourself. You want to say something on that?
I don't have any much experience with the panel up there, but there's a couple of details in regards to 1080. There are a lot of restrictions in regards to controlling it, bait size, burying, tying, picking up baits. In regards to national parks, they do surveys before they can bait it to see what the population is. If the population isn't at a higher level than what they would see being stable, then the population is very low. Then they'll go. If not, then nothing. They don't do anything. In regards to 1080 for baiting for pigs, generally we use grain, so that targets the speed. We use trying to reduce the species, so we actually sorry. last 7 to 10 days. After that, it was supposed to break down. From the study. I know everyone disagrees. Okay, well, I'm just stating what I have, the information I have available. It's 7 to 10 days. That's what's been stated. Okay. I'm just putting it out, okay? There are, and today is not the only option. There are so many different options that people don't use. Okay? Like integrated management. It's sometimes no management is the option. Okay? So it's a whole range of things.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. James just had one final comment. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. It's just in relation to pigs. There are other alternatives to control their numbers, and certainly you'll see that every second bloke under the age of 30 now has a cage in the back of their ute and they go pig hunting. And that, I don't know what the actual numbers are that are destroyed by hunting, but I would think it's significant. You probably know more than that, Juliet. Numbers come into council, but look, I know all my sons' mates, they go out pig hunting. You know, my sons have been on excursions a few times as well. They go out with dogs and they pull them down, whatever. You got a bit of a principle, I suppose. I don't get involved with it, but yeah, there are other alternatives to 1080. But I think the key to everything is balance. You know, I think that's how we need to approach it all. You've got to strike a balance. You've got to strike a balance so that you're sustainable in your farming enterprise. You've got to strike a balance so that the environment is looked after and sustainable long term. Nobody wants to have a place where we're all going to get out of the tubes.
On that note, with time actually on schedule, which is quite good for these sorts of things, they can go. I know some people might feel that they've got more to say. Obviously, please take time to grab contact details and follow up and continue your learning. If I could just sum up by saying that I'm over the moon that Malcom and Carol and their groups have had the courage to put this together. We have come in, we have coexisted for a couple of hours. And the catch for me was, and I come back to Newton's third law again. I would like to see personally a little bit more information gathering. I think Malcolm mentioned earlier some of the data that their group would like to have. It's frustrating them. I'd like to see the government spend a little bit more money going through what is ground zero, what belongs where. I don't think enough work's done in that. So when we do something, we can measure something. And I think rather than saying, bang, we've got a problem, we might be doing it on individual blocks. But that surge in wild dogs, they could have been wild dogs. It had nothing to do with dingoes. They could have been crossbred. Wolf dogs. Who knows? But I think the research is the key in getting that data to everyone. So, look, I'd just like to thank the panel who can come here with Dr. Arian. Thank you very much. And Malcom. Ray. James. Lindsay. Adam. Now I reckon Harry got the best clap out of all. So the panellist of the year is Harry Jamieson. Right, so up we go now. We've got something for them, I believe, but we're going to do the raffle.